ready to go.
Are you?
Oh, yeah. I'm a pro. I'm a pro at this now. I've been doing this for a little while. So I'm not new to the podcasting game. I'm not a Johnny-come-lately.
Yeah.
When that red light goes on, I'm ready to... Yeah. I'm ready to go. Ready to start riffing.
Okay. You're
at
definitely
any time.
not stalling for time right now. But
Nope.
All right.
Nope. Not trying to just kill a couple minutes before we...
Before we get to our interview.
The bulk. Yeah.
With Brad Johnson.
That
was a good one.
Yeah. It was good. You know what? We've been having a little bit of success lately talking about the climate and climate policy and not feeling horrible after.
I think people like that, yeah.
Yeah. That's kind of nice. It's a nice refreshing change from the way we normally do things.
Yeah, I was going through some of our Apple podcast reviews, which people, if you want to, and you want to leave a good review, head on over to Apple Podcasts and please leave us a positive 5-star review. Someone last year was like, this show makes me want to slip my wrists. It's like, okay, I guess we could improve on that a little bit.
Yeah.
Like, I'm sorry, I didn't create the problems. I'm just talking about them.
Yeah. We can just upgrade people from wanting to slit their wrist to just wanting to just climb into a hole and just stay there for a little while.
That's an upgrade.
That's the sweet spot.
This is good, though. This was not as doomer as some climate episodes have been, because there's good news, and Brad is here to talk about the good news on the climate front.
Yep.
So,
yeah,
definitely stay tuned.
It was excellent. And Brad's the writer of the Substack newsletter Hill Heat, which I think if you're interested in climate policy and how that pertains to the U.S. government, that's definitely something you want to give a follow to. Really good stuff.
We've got a link in the description. Go subscribe. Throw him a follow. Definitely good authority on climate news and climate science. So really, really happy he joined us today.
Yeah.
But Rob, did you know I'm headed to the Big Apple this weekend?
The Windy City. Yeah.
Yeah. There's room there, I guess. It's all the same. Yes, Rob, I will be heading to glamorous New York City this weekend, this Saturday night, to speak at the Internet Culture Festival put on by Digital Void. And I've done one of Digital Void's events before when it was in D.C., and it was a blast. And they invited me to come up to their New York event this Saturday night, the 10th, I believe. Let me look at yes, I knew that. And I have something I think will be funny and informative. So there's a link in the description. If you want to get tickets, you can use the promo code ICF for a $5 discount. They're already $18. That knocks you down to $13. And a friend of the show, Manny Fidel, will also be speaking, and he and I have something up our sleeve that we think is going to make you laugh, going to make you cry, going to make you feel all the emotions. It's going to be great. So New York, it's at a place called Caveat. I think it's on the Lower East Side or Midtown, somewhere in there. It's in Manhattan. I'm sorry, I didn't pick the location. If you live in Brooklyn, just take the train. You'll be fine. You'll live. But yeah, it's in Midtown, I think. It's going to be great. It's on Saturday night. So please come out. Would love to say hi and would love to fill the place for a bunch of really funny and informative presentations and talks.
Yeah, and a couple of other friends of the show appearing there. It seems like it's going to be pretty interesting. I imagine my invite must have just got lost in the mail, possibly like a border thing, Canadian border thing. No matter. I barely thought about it at all. Didn't even occur to me.
There's no Canadian policy at least, so
which is fair.
Why.
I understand that, and I actually support that. And I also know that New York is not the Windy City. Okay, that was a little gag, little rib for some of our
japes.
One of my famous japes. That's right, for our American listeners. I am aware of that, just in case anyone was getting ready to type up their angry missive to the insurgents' Twitter. Save it, yes, please do.
Unless you're a paid intern, and then you can do whatever you want.
Then you're allowed, yeah.
To become a paid intern, though, you can head on over to theinsurgents.substack.com, subscribe to the show. It's just $5 a month. You get access to a bonus episode every week and the honorary distinction, the title bestowed upon you of paid intern. So become a paid intern of the Insurgents today. It's just $5 a month. You support the show, You get a nice little badge that you can wear around the office. Theinsurgents.substack.com. We really appreciate everybody who subscribes. It keeps the show going. It helps make it sustainable. So thank you to everyone.
Yes. Thank you very much to our beloved army of paid interns.
That's
at
right.
The Insurgents Podcast. We couldn't do this without you.
That's right.
We couldn't keep the content mill turning.
It's the fuel that drives us.
Exactly. And some of you are physically sacrificing your bodies for that fuel, and we appreciate it. Sleeping at the office.
That's right.
We've converted the office. We've put beds in there and stuff now, so you don't even have to go home.
And that's totally legal, by the way.
Yeah. It's totally fine to do that.
But yeah, let's get to our conversation with Brad. That's a conversation for another day.
Yes, I think so. Yeah, let's definitely get to our conversation with Hill Heat's Brad Johnson. Really good one. Very much enjoyed it. I think you will too. Brad's going to be joining the show right after this. I just had some McDonald's. Yeah, McDonald's.
That's how you want to start this out.
We started off talking about food in the last podcast, and I'm generally a McDonald's proponent. My kid really likes Happy Meals, so whether it's good or bad, I tend to eat McDonald's a fair amount. Really, the difference in quality from when you first buy it, if you wait any longer than 5-10 minutes to consume it, it's amazing how fast the quality drastically plummets.
I'm just generally not a fan.
No?
Yeah, the fries really congeal. I think there's a lot of just congealing fat that happens.
Everyone said before I went to Europe last year, like, oh, you got to try McDonald's there. It's so much different. So I did. I was in Switzerland, and I got Royale with cheese. Is that what it's called? And
because of the metric system.
Yeah, exactly. And it tasted the same. I didn't notice some substantial difference. Everyone acted like it was so different in other countries, and I just don't see it.
I thought that was the whole point of McDonald's, is that it's supposed to taste the same wherever you are.
Yeah, it's brand consistency.
Yeah. Although sometimes in foreign countries they'll do different menu items. That's kind of interesting.
That's intriguing. But yeah, that's it. I don't get it. Well, I'm sorry your food was cold? Is that
it was
the
not
point?
very good, no.
Okay.
I waited too long to consume the McDonald's.
But we're joined today.
Live and learn, I guess.
Anything else on McDonald's?
No, that's all. God, that's all the material.
All right.
Hey, listen,
This segment has been sponsored by McDonald's.
Yeah, we got to do a little chit chat. We can't just dive right into things. How things go.
Yeah,
that's just what I had today.
You're really going with you put the cold in the cold open with old McDonald's.
That's right. Yeah.
But Brad Johnson, author of Hill Heat over on Substack, joins us today. Brad, we're so happy to have you here. You're breaking down in your newsletter and with us this Manchin dirty deal, is permitting reform, this thing he's been trying to push now for a few months. But before we get into that, Brad, tell us about Hill Heat, and again, we're really happy to have you here.
Oh, thanks. I was a little worried when you introduced me and said that I was breaking down, but I write a mostly daily climate politics newsletter that's focused mostly on what's happening in the nation's capital, but also some degree what's happening around the world. And I've kind of gone back to my roots. 10 years ago, I was at Think Progress and was a climate blogger there. And in the intervening years, I've worked for some climate advocacy groups and helped start up Climate Hawks Vote, which was a PAC and C4 that did advocacy and endorse Climate Hawk candidates. And now I'm in D.C. and trying to, I guess, document the atrocities and some of the victories, which we actually had. So it was a fun, so this has actually been a more fun week than I was expecting.
Yeah, definitely, all around. Brad, before we go any further, though, we have a question to ask you. And we ask all of our guests the same one. And now it's your turn. Brad Johnson, are you a gamer?
No.
You kind of waffled there.
Well, I mean, if it's like, have you ever played board games? But the thing I can say is if you're like, have you watched all of Action Button Season 1? Then I can say yes.
Okay. I don't know what that is, but we'll count it.
Me neither. Yeah. Sounds good to me.
If you don't know who Tim Rogers is, then you are in for a treat.
Okay. I'm
the type of guy who I'll watch the full playthroughs of video games on YouTube, but I did play Disco Elysium recently, and that's
that counts.
That definitely counts.
Yeah, of course.
That's at my speed. I mean, does it count though if you save scum your way through it to only get the good ending?
I think so.
I think that counts.
I stopped playing when I went up to the Union guys and picked a fight with them, and they killed me. So I wish I would have saved more frequently.
Oh, it has an autosave. Like, you just have to.
I think that's fine. That counts. We're rounding up here. Brad Johnson gamer.
I think when I played Disco Elysium, I think someone that had played already gave me a tip, which is to not ever take off the necktie, which did end up working in my favor in the end. That's a little hot tip for all the gamers out there. Keep that necktie on. Yeah. It comes in handy later.
I need to finish it. Eventually I will.
It's very worth it.
It really is, yeah.
I haven't really gotten past that big gate with the character that I guess it seems like a pretty heavy-handed caricature of Peter Dow. Look, I'm serious because I guess the guys who made it, even though they're from somewhere in Europe, really pay closely to American lefty politics, and some of the original voices were just people from Twitter and other podcast hosts. And one of the characters it's like a spitting image of Peter Dow, and I think they made this before his rebrand, before he turned super lefty.
Right.
That's funny.
Yeah. So all right, we'll count it. Brad's a gamer.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm not anti-game.
Well, that's good. Then it would have been a hostile conversation.
But it's funny. I actually literally was having this almost identical conversation with somebody with Mark Slutsky, who is among other things, a video game writer. And I was saying that I wasn't really a gamer, and he's like, everyone's a gamer. So.
Yeah.
That's also our stance, the official stance of this podcast as well. So.
All right, it counts. Rob, you wanted to mention something about the new Fortnite season? You DM'd me the other night.
I was surprised it didn't come up in our last conversation.
I haven't been home in 2 weeks.
Right. So you haven't tried it out yet?
No.
Oh, interesting. I think this is the first time I've ever been leveled up higher than you.
Did you say that you haven't done it in 2 weeks?
I haven't been home in 2 weeks.
So in a fortnight.
Oh, shit. That's so good.
We got gaming-related humor
Look
now.
At this.
Very cool. That's good. I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts on it. It's a totally brand new map. I'm still kind of figuring all that out. It's kind of a different vibe. There's dirt bikes. New weapons are pretty cool.
All right, yeah, I'll be home.
It's pretty good.
We'll have to head home and then go to New York for an event. I'll talk about in the intro. But Monday, I'll start leveling up. So enjoy your lead on me in the battle pass while you can.
Okay, sounds good. I will.
Let's get to the news, though. Brad is here to talk about, among other things, this Manchin dirty deal that he tried to put into this must-pass NDAA, this military spending bill. Now, Brad, for people who don't know what this dirty deal is, or this pipeline reform push that he's been advocating for and trying to weasel into other pieces of must-pass legislation, what is it, and why should people be concerned about it?
Well, we kind of have to go back to the Inflation Reduction Act, which was the big kind of hyper-pared down and Manchinized version of Build Back Better, which was attached to reconciliation legislation, which meant that the Democrats didn't need any Republican votes to get it through. And that was the surprise deal that included hundreds of billions of dollars in climate and energy related spending, some of which was very good and some of it was very bad, which is why you had kind of both environmental organizations and oil companies happy with it. But part of that deal was that Joe Biden, the president, and Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi promised Joe Manchin that his the quote unquote permit reform bill would also be passed later. Senate rules didn't allow it to be part of this package, but it includes both mandating the construction of a frack gas pipeline that's going through West Virginia called the Mountain Valley Pipeline, and would fast track permitting for a wide array of energy infrastructure. So that includes, and that's the reason that there have been some advocates for it, fast tracking permitting for like electric transmission and potentially for renewable projects, but also tying them to fast tracking fossil fuel infrastructure, like more frack gas facilities, export facilities, pipelines, and oil drilling. So the thing to know is that it wasn't just Joe Manchin trying to do this. This was something that the White House has been pushing, that Schumer has been pushing, and they tried to attach it to the what was the kind of like the must pass keep the government open spending bill that had to pass in September, and so that was when it looked like it was going to pass, but it was stopped by honestly kind of like surprising coalition of both kind of what we consider progressive Democrats, but also more conservative ones, and that like were not willing to have pipelines go through their districts. And like one of the key leaders was Don McKeegan, who was a representative from Virginia, who, while a member of the New Democratic Party and not a progressive, was an environmental justice leader. And he had been working for years on this permit reform bill that was like designed around environmental justice principles. So he was genuinely pissed off about this. And he and other people, both in the House, but also some key Senate leaders, with like very aggressive pushing from the environmental movement, stopped this really at the last minute. And unfortunately, in the last few weeks, McKeegan has passed away. He had colorectal cancer that he had been fighting for over a decade. And so that was one of the things that helped put the kibosh on this latest attempt, which was that, basically Democrats were just not going to go and let this Manchin bill pass, like literally on the day that they're going to McKeeshan's funeral.
Yeah. So one of the things that opponents pointed out, that doing this right on the heels of passing the Inflation Reduction Act would undercut some of the steps in the right direction, these steps forward on addressing climate change, the climate provisions within the IRA. Many argue, especially in more establishment Democratic circles, this is the biggest and best and boldest thing a country has ever done on this front. Wherever those chips fall, it's definitely, again, like a step in the right direction. Doing this on the heels of that seems counterintuitive if that's your broader goal.
Yeah, definitely.
I feel like you definitely have some thoughts on the climate provisions in the IRA, because some of the projections that we've seen were like had a pretty wide range. It's like, oh, well, it could have this impact or this impact, and they're totally disproportionate and far off. There's a pretty wide range of outcomes here. Have you seen any new information or research or studies showing a little bit more of a refined take, and also the impact of this the permitting reform and Manchin's deal? Do you have like anything concrete that would help people understand just how disastrous this would be for the environment?
One challenge is that to my knowledge, there hasn't been any recent modeling since the big push in in August and September, but that's been released publicly. One thing to know about the Inflation Reduction Act is that it's comprised almost entirely of incentives for doing stuff as opposed to penalties for, say, polluting. And so what the kind of like long-term impact will be in terms of what our total pollution as a nation will look like is kind of up in the air. One thing that the act does that is why there was criticism from the start and would be kind of double down with the pipeline permitting deal is that it ties renewable energy development with fossil fuel development. Now, kind of like the modelers are like, well, the fossil fuels will probably be like exported, and the impact of the incentives for new drilling in oil and gas would be offset by incentives for electrification of vehicles and like in heating and the like. And like that might be the case, but like one thing also recognizes when they say like offset, what they mean is like, well, okay, if it's being exported to like Europe or wherever, then we don't really need to count it. And that very, very much doesn't address the problem that if you say live in on the Gulf Coast, or what's kind of known as the Permian Basin, which is this whole region going to stretches from Louisiana into Texas, that people have figured out how to extract massive amounts of natural gas and oil from through novel fracking technology. That doesn't help them. And right now there are, I think, literally dozens of new petrochemical factories and LNG export plants and processing facilities and pipelines that are being brought online right now, partly as a result of decisions made under the Trump presidency, but also ones that are being approved right now by the Biden administration. And so if you live there, and that region is known as Cancer Alley now, and basically if you live there, you're pretty much guaranteed to die an early death from some really horrifying form of cancer. So people who live there were less pleased about the IRA and were very not pleased by the Manchin's deal.
So Manchin tries to get this into the NDAA, which should pass this week. And people when murmurs of his intent started to spread on the Hill and in Washington, a lot of people stood up and became vocal. And now we just saw today that it's not going to be included, and even tried to appeal to some Republicans to get it through, and was unsuccessful in doing so. Could you talk a little bit about the opposition to take two for Manchin?
Yeah.
And do you think this is something that he could try again, as we still have a couple more weeks in a lame duck period before the new Congress is sworn in?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, he's stated his intention to offer it as an amendment to the bill, but which I think, and you should not quote me on this necessarily, but I'm pretty sure that would require 60 votes, which it would have a lot of trouble getting, even more than get the 50 votes that. But and the other point is just remember that, like, the thing to remember about this is that this is something that President Biden has said that he wants and will keep pushing for. And like Manchin is not like Manchin. It was genuinely comical the first time around when Manchin knew that he needed some Republican votes in the Senate to get it through, and he was sincerely surprised that Republicans weren't his friend. It was He got to the point where he was like almost literally just whining about why don't you like me?
It's that classic Democratic move of, if we just propose all this conservative legislation, surely these conservatives will vote for it. But it doesn't make sense. I don't get this. What's going on?
And sincerely, like, I mean, he's very functionally especially on this stuff, like indistinguishable from a Republican. But the incentive to, not give Biden a win, even if it's a win for their team, was essentially too strong. And also, just like, I think people just don't like Joe Manchin very much. And that's one of the weird things about the Senate, is a lot of it really is built on relationships like that. But the second time around, there was the same situation where, like, the Military Spending Act usually passes with overwhelmingly, but with lots and lots of Republicans. So generally, this is a bill that progressive Democrats vote against because they're not actually excited about spending nearly $1 trillion on our global war machine. But then Republicans usually support it. But this was just a case where the Republicans are more interested in pushing a much more aggressive version of what Manchin has proposed, and they're just not interested in giving Biden a win, even if it's a win that, like, politically they would agree with.
I'm wondering too, because, like, I guess it's a victory that these climate hawks kept Manchin's bill out of the NDAA. But one thing that came up on the last time we had a kind of sort of climate-focused episode a few weeks ago with Darna Noor from the Boston Globe, that's kind of the sick irony of this, is that, yes, Manchin's zombie deal is taken out of the NDAA, but you still have this massive, $857.9 billion defense bill. And when you point to the role of the United States military as one of the top carbon emitters in the world, and its role in creating climate change around the world, it's kind of bittersweet, right? Yes, Manchin's bill is gone from there, but there's still this massive investment into the U.S. military, which is increasing the rate of climate change and is substantially more of an investment than what they're investing into actual, green climate policies, right?
Yeah, I mean, and arguably one of the core functions of the U.S. military is to protect the global fossil fuel distribution mechanism. And I mean, there's a reason that the United States is heavily involved in the Middle East. And I mean, and it's totally fair to, like, recognize that energy and its production and distribution is kind of the underlying question for human civilization. So it's not that surprising. It's like, plays obviously an exceedingly key role in what Russia is doing with its invasion of Ukraine. And so this stuff it's not that this stuff is easy, but yeah, absolutely is the case. Like, the military is as a kind of an individual entity, is the world's largest consumer of fossil fuels. And, like, there are lots of good people who are interested in trying to kind of make the military more green, but the kind of fundamental argument that the role of the military is not necessarily something that's, like, consonant with a world without fossil fuels. So, I mean, these are it's the type of thing where it's like, if we didn't have like a politics that was where one party fully represented the interests of the fossil fuel industry, like, we could have a reasonable debate. Like, there is a reasonable debate to be had between, like, say, the progressive wing of the Democratic Party and the more corporate and more military focused military wing of the Democratic Party. And it's but that's unfortunately not where the axis of decision making is.
One thing I was hoping you could speak to, you mentioned it earlier, that Republicans want this ostensibly, this pipeline or this permitting reform, but they want a much more aggressive version of that. Going into a split Congress next year, do you think that they'll try to push this in the House and then see what they can muster in the Senate? And we'll get to the Georgia runoff in a bit, because it's now going to be 51-49, so it's a little bit. I wouldn't even say different. It's just one additional Democratic vote next to Congress and the Senate. But it does nullify Manchin and Sinema's power. an ability to hamstring Democrats on certain things. So do you think, like, what do you expect the Republicans will do in this much more aggressive attempt to get permit reform?
I mean, I have to say that I am like notoriously bad at, looking into the future.
That's okay.
But like, it's interesting. I mean, I think that the point that you made is one thing that's really important. And it's why I said in today's newsletter that I called this the end of the Manchin presidency. Is it's not that Manchin's power has all gone away, but he is no longer the kind of at the fulcrum of the decision point in the conflict for political decision making. The kind of the key agent for thwarting the White House agenda now will be House Republicans. And one thing that's like a big deal, for example, with the 51-49 in the Senate is it means that right now, because it's a 50-50 Senate, all of the committees have the same number of Democrats and Republicans on them. And now the Democrats, because they have a numeric majority, will now be able to have a majority of seats on the committees. And so that changes things. But, like what we're probably going to see is we're going to see kind of like a rotating cast of Democratic heels, essentially.
Sure.
Like, maybe there'll be like super exciting Manchin cinema team ups. But most of the time, I think what we'll see is you'll just see that House Republicans will try to push stuff and, just like make it much harder for like good legislation to pass. Because whereas I don't think Senate Democrats are going to let the worst excesses of House Republicans to come through. I mean, the other thing on the Republican majority in the House is, while we should never, it's a mistake to underestimate how bad, like, the collective effort of a bunch of genuinely stupid and disorganized and mean people can be. They are collectively stupid and mean and venal, and they don't like each other, and they're like, they would be much more effective if they like could actually organize, but they don't want, I mean, the whole thing kind of like you have these people who not only are not interested in governance, but they're like on the edge of straight up. Some of these are, they're like lunatics. And so whereas, the Democrats have, as a party in Congress, have kind of real problems. Most of them are generally competent and like interested in having a government that works. So I'm hopeful is that kind of there will be Democrats in the House that, even though they don't have any power kind of formally, will be able to get things done just because the Republicans will shoot themselves in the foot. But that's kind of like the optimistic viewpoint. And there are plenty of reasons to be more pessimistic about it. But, we'll get to see. I mean, one thing that we know is that there will continue to be major crises. There'll be climate crises. And these things will precipitate action of some kind or another. And there are very competent conservative and fossil fuel lobbyists waiting in the wings to push stuff. And that's the type of thing where we'll see kind of like where the battles are joined. And a lot of it so much of it matters to like kind of what position and stance the White House chooses to take. You can kind of think of it as like, what does Joe Biden think he's going to be popular to run for reelection on? And so that's one of the reasons that, like, kind of on a just on a straight political standpoint, what the public does and what organizers do and how people organize really matters for what decisions people in Washington make.
This is kind of tangentially related to everything with the bill and everything, but Elon Musk is someone that's been kind of inescapable lately, and it's kind of unavoidable to talk about him lately, what with his taking over of Twitter and everything. But I think related to some of the things you're saying, it's worth mentioning, how Musk built this brand on basically being this climate warrior, kind of savior of humanity type, pioneering green technology and electric vehicles, etc. And now, of course, because of the woke mind virus, he just has no choice but to support these conservative politicians like Ron DeSantis. He's talking about how Ron DeSantis is going to be his candidate in the coming election. Not sure how DeSantis's climate policies match up to the Musk's previous image that he's kind of carefully and meticulously cultivated, but I'm guessing probably not so great on climate Ron DeSantis. Also, something from this week's Hill Heat, talking about how since climate warrior electric vehicle pioneer Elon Musk takes over Twitter, now there's this. Not only is there a huge uptick and huge surge in racial slurs, but also a lot of a huge surge in climate denialism, and which is like affecting the ability of climate scientists to talk about this issue on Twitter. Do you want to just talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, the funny thing is, like, in some sense, that's one of the challenges is that saying that you want to do something on climate is good marketing for billionaires. And it's something that Naomi Klein has actually done a lot of good writing about. And, watching everybody from Richard Branson to Jeff Bezos, they've all done this. Yeah. Bill Gates, they've all like gone this thing where they're like, oh, I really care about global warming. We're going to solve it.
They've all got their special NGOs. That, like, kind of Musk did a better job of that.
Yeah. But, the article, this was in The Guardian and it's been published in a few other places, was a piece about how, exactly what you said, climate scientists who kind of built like a lot of other communities, had a robust and healthy kind of subculture on Twitter, have just been barraged by a real rise in right-wing climate denial. And so, it's a straight up problem. I mean, Musk has been pretty explicit that he is not opposed to misinformation anymore on his platforms. And it's going to be, it's the type of thing where, like, I still have a Twitter account, but I've set up on Mastodon and I'm kind of working on building a space there. And fortunately, I'm old enough that I remember life before Twitter. But even though I'm something of a Twitter addict now, and so, it's like sometimes you just got to admit that it's like sometimes, like, and it's happened, like, you have a favorite bar and, like, then it gets bought by some guy and he starts inviting Nazis into the bar, and then it's a Nazi bar. And you just have to be like, I love the bar, but I gotta go.
You talk about the whole billionaire climate warrior trend. It's so funny. Like, you mentioned Jeff Bezos. I can't help but laugh, like, when he frames his whole, like, vanity fake space travel thing, Blue Origin or whatever it is, as being once I was in the Earth's atmosphere, then I looked at the planet and I knew how important it was and how we all have to pull it together. It's like, we already knew about this, Jeff. Like, you didn't need to build a spaceship to learn that we all live on the same planet. We have to do something about climate. He's trying to frame this, like, very obvious vanity, just big waste of everyone's time and resources to just fly in a plane really high and not even go to space, but framing it as some kind of altruistic, now it's the pale blue dot kind of thing. It's like, come on, Jeff.
Quest, man.
Jeff, come on.
Yeah, I think it's probably not a very good idea for I don't think it's healthy for human brains to have, like, that much individual power and wealth. No. Like, I think rockets are cool, but I also, there are a lot of cool things that are bad ideas, So, the fundamental problem, I think, is that, it's kind of is that being a billionaire, it requires an extraction of wealth from the world at a rate that it means that our current system, the global economy, like, you need it to keep going in the way that it's going. And so kind of fundamentally, I would like to believe that there's, some kind of, like, simple magic version where we, like, stop using fossil fuels and nobody has to change their lifestyles or anything. But, the reality is that extractive capitalism is not a sustainable thing. And the only way to become a billionaire is to be like almost an avatar of that system.
Yeah. And you must uphold the system at all costs in order to continue being a billionaire.
Right.
I mean, that's kind of one of many frustrating things about Musk as well, is he frames this whole Mars nonsense as being some like climate change thing. Like, because the planet is in trouble, we need to make sure we colonize other planets. And it's like, no matter how much work you do on Mars, colonizing Mars, and no matter how bad the climate might get on Earth, there is still oxygen here. Like, we're all here now, several billion of us. Like, instead of moving us to another place, we could just be putting these resources into fixing the problem here, right now, where we all currently are. And if Musk had spent maybe some of the last 10, 15 years putting these vast resources into that, like putting it into, for instance, public transit, instead of these like fake Hyperloop projects, which are almost designed to halt public transit projects. He could have been putting his vast resources and energy and time, and apparently his apparent genius that we're supposed to worship. He could have been putting that towards fixing the actual problems here on Earth right now, currently. But he seems determined to make those problems worse. And then, continue this like completely fake, hopeless idea that we're going to be able to transplant people to another planet and live in some kind of geodesic domes, and that's going to be better for everyone. Like, it's pretty silly.
So you're saying that you're not a fan?
Not a huge fan, no.
Well, I told you, Rob, the tweet that I saw from one of the Elon fans in his replies a couple weeks ago. You better watch out, man. If you keep talking shit, you're not going to get to go to Mars.
Yeah.
You have to be nice to him if you want to go, because that's definitely on the table right
For
now.
sure.
Everyone's on the table. If you send a mean tweet, you're out.
No, seeing how he's run Twitter over the last couple of weeks and saying, like, what if this, but there was a finite amount of oxygen? Yeah, that sounds like a really great idea. I would really love that.
Yeah, no, it's really horrifying. The one thing that I thought might be interesting is like that kind of heel turn that Musk has done from going kind of be like, oh, like I care about climate, to know like actually I'm like some kind of 4chan troll, is not that dissimilar from Kirsten Sinema's political arc, where she built her political base within the progressive movement. And once she reached the national stage, she's like, oh, not actually progressive. Actually, like, I like sipping wine with billionaires. And I think that's kind of a good parallel to, like, if you, in other words, if you think of Elon Musk kind of as like a self-centered marketing guy, that, I mean, the kind of that process makes a lot more sense, that he's like, this is how he got to the top.
There's one thing I did want to talk about with you both, and that is the news out of Georgia last night and how that's going to, like, you mentioned it earlier, Brad, but I think the broader context I think is helpful for people. So Raphael Warnock won re-election last night in the Georgia runoff, defeating Herschel Walker, who ran a really strong campaign on issues like who's better, werewolves or vampires.
Yeah.
I think that's the extent of it. But really, he was just kind of like propped up by Republicans for a while at the end of his camp. Like the last couple of weeks, really hasn't been doing many media appearances. He's been sitting with people like Lindsey Graham and Ted Cruz, who did the talking for him. He just seemed really incoherent and babbled a lot. And I think that really, once the scrutiny was on, he wasn't kind of riding Kemp's coattails in the general election. We saw that play out last night, where he underperformed in areas that he won just a couple weeks ago in November, and Warnock overperformed in areas that he won in November. So people just either stayed home, the third-party vote went Warnock, or people just were turned off by everything that they've come to understand about Herschel Walker. Either way, it's a win, and that does impact, like you mentioned, Brad, the committee breakdowns. I don't think a lot of people really understood how the committees were evenly split last 2 years, and this actually does help on things like, judicial appointments and nominations to different agencies and bureaus, which, because of the split Congress, they're going to have to lean on that a little bit harder now, because they're not going to get as favorable of legislation through the House that they might want. So they're going to have to, rely on bureaucratic powers and executive powers to do things. You still have the challenge of the Supreme Court, but challenges in court. Like, people have been complaining for years about Republican judges, Trump nominees, Bush nominees, striking down things that Biden has tried to do, and even the last few years of Obama that he tried to do. So I'm wondering what your guys' takeaways are from that runoff and the road ahead, now that we know there's going to be one additional Democratic vote in the Senate.
Well, the glass half empty look is just the reminder that even though Herschel Walker was, I mean, as you described, kind of literally incoherent and kind of known to be abusive and a liar, got 48% of the vote in. And so there are a lot of people who are just like, you know, at the end of the day, I vote Republican and I just can't support the, you know, what I consider to be like a extremely corporate moderate Democratic presidency. And so there's there's extreme polarization, especially driven by the right. And like that's the kind of like the half empty look. The half full look is that that, as you said, like Warnock picked up some more and, you know, won by 3 points. So while the number of people who put their, you know, morals or principles over kind of their partisan interests was not large, it was definitely more than 0 people. And the other thing that I think is a real important thing that was both true in November elections and today is just the young people keep coming out to vote in surprising numbers. One specific thing that I didn't know until recently about Georgia is that they changed how they made voter registration much closer to automatic. They added the kind of like the DMV registration, and so that dramatically increased the voter rolls in the last few years. And that's one of the things that really helped. I mean, and that's just kind of like the thing that we're facing is that so much of what we're going to face on an electoral basis is both a matter of like who the candidates are and what the parties are for, but also just the machinery of elections and all these things. You know, I mean, I'm not saying anything new, but I think that it'll be interesting to see how the Senate, I mean, even though the Senate leadership isn't expected to change in any meaningful way, but, you know, we'll see what comes up. A big fight that's coming up very soon and that smarter people than me are worried about is the debt ceiling fight that, for reasons that are completely unclear, Democrats aren't doing anything about while they still have power. And it could give House Republicans just a wild amount of leverage that would be really terrible because, you know, they can use that to threaten government shutdowns and, you know, just kind of destroy our ability to spend any meaningful money on like things like the next COVID pandemic or things like that are coming down the pike.
Yeah.
What were your takeaways? Did you think the last minute commercial with the college swimmer who hates trans swimmers, do you think that was effective for Herschel Walker?
Weird that's not the primary political cause that people are gravitating to. I don't know, weird miscalculation on the part of the conservative movement. And yeah, it's like I agree with you that, you know, there's obviously a lot of benefits and a lot of positive things you can take away from the Democrats managing to sort of stave off what looked at first over the first couple of months of the Biden administration like they were going to get a historic ass kicking, and managing to avoid that. Like you said, judicial appointments. I'm sold on the basic idea that for a number of reasons, it's better to have, these kind of corporate liberals in charge rather than conservatives, you know, whether it's climate change where conservatives don't even believe that it is happening or legislating in the opposite direction. You know, there's a number of reasons why I think Democrats are better. But my issue is, especially I mentioned this after the midterms, but, you know, when young people are showing up to vote for the Democratic Party and are getting excited about them for these reasons, like because they claim to care about the climate, they care about these other issues that young people are passionate about. This is the problem, though, when Democrats fail to deliver on any kind of a bold vision. when they don't deliver on a bold climate vision. I know they've framed their climate bill as being the most historic climate legislation in the history of the world, and maybe that's true. It's still woefully inadequate. We've talked about that a number of times. Even if it does do a few good things, when they double and triple down on this completely out of control military spending, foreign military entanglements. Joe Biden has pulled out of Afghanistan, but it seems like the whole security state establishment just wants to pivot towards this kind of new Cold War situation. They're passing bills to break railway strike legislation. Biden's meager efforts to eliminate student debt or take a chunk out of people's student debt are being held up in the courts and doesn't even know if it's going to happen. His drug policy that they touted as being historic is not going anywhere near far enough. And I guess this is my problem, is that, this is where the cynicism sets in when young people get involved with like electoral politics, whether it's in the United States or Canada, and support these kind of liberal parties who use progressive language about things like climate or social justice or the military or any of this stuff. And then when they fail to deliver on that, or when they legislate in the opposite direction, that's where that deep cynicism sets in. That's when people become completely paralyzed and don't want to participate in this in the whole system anymore. That enables the right and enables the right wing, as it allows them to accumulate more power and continue doing all the bad stuff even more than the Democrats do. So I guess that's it. It's like, congratulations to the Dems for holding the Senate. But they still do need to do what they can to deliver on a bold agenda, or else they're not going to be able to continue delivering those kind of results. That cynicism is going to set in for young people that supported them this time around.
Yeah, and thankfully, Republicans have really just, in many areas and many elections, really gone all in on just really ineffective strategies.
Yeah.
I kind of alluded to the anti-trans collegiate sports thing. We talked about it before. Women's sports has always been a punchline, especially to conservatives. You expect that to be
now all of a sudden it's the
that's
primary,
going to get
the women's
that's going
sports
to get people
defenders.
to the polls.
Yeah.
Yeah, they don't give a shit. It's easy to post about on Facebook or react to, but it's not going to, inspire them to make a voting plan and show up or wait in the rain for 3 hours to vote. They're not going to care that much. They're not offering their voters anything, so I think Democrats taking advantage of that while they can is great. But, like you're saying, you got a short window there, because eventually when you continually fail to deliver on these bold promises, people are going to get cynical. People are going to tune out. You really can't afford that. So I worry that these types of wins, and even the midterm shaping up the way it did, which is, I think, good for Dems, definitely not the worst case scenario everyone was worrying about. I don't know what lessons they're going to take away from that in the elite Democratic circles. Is it going to be, hey, we got lucky here, or, oh, they love us? And I'm concerned, based on how they've operated over the past 2 decades, it's going to be the latter.
I think that's a safe bet.
Well, I want to give a plug for the documentary that I saw last night, called To the End, which is by the documentarian who did Knock Down the House, which follows the AOC campaign and the campaign of other left-wing female candidates. And it's this movie follows 4 young women, including AOC, who were leaders in the movement to build the Green No Deal and to pass it. And it really gets exactly to these questions that you were raising right here, of what does it mean to be a young person engaging in our politics now? And how do you engage when the Democratic establishment and so much of the Democratic Party is opposed to what you're asking for or demanding? And how do you build power? In other words, these, you literally, what's the great, in the documentary, you get to see climate activists, showing up and confronting Joe Manchin when he's driving his Maserati through DC. And you get to see them confronting, Dianne Feinstein, and confronting Nancy Pelosi, and confronting Joe Biden, and also confronting all of the corporate media, and confronting all the corporate lobbyists, and confronting all of the Republicans. And why they're doing that, it's really difficult for me to even talk about as someone who's now, 20, 25 years older than some of these people who, all they've known as children their entire lives are, years of endless wildfires and floods. And they are not, and choose, making the choice not to be cynical and making the choice not to give up hope, because they decide that they don't have that choice. And it's really quite inspiring to watch. It's also just like a very well-made movie. If you care about kind of like the craft of filmmaking, it's really well cut. So I totally recommend it. It's coming out this Friday. It's called To the End. And so I really recommend it because it's like, it's a story of people who are confronting that fact at the highest level. And, so it's following the leaders of Sunrise Movement, the leaders of Justice Democrats. And it's really, so it's, and getting to see Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in the halls of Congress. And so it's a really, it brought me back to why I engage in this fight. And some of it is just like the reason that I can't let myself be cynical and give up is because I know that there are other people who are in harder circumstances who aren't giving up either.
Totally. I think that's an important thing to remind yourself of. And what I try to, and not to be redundant, but remind myself of as well is, we might lose a lot of these battles. And, we might not get the outcomes that we want, and things might go south from here. And that's very possible. But at the end of the day, I just want to be able to say I tried. At least I did everything I could to stop it. I wasn't part of the problem. So, kind of giving in to defeatism, I don't really think is an option. I think people, especially on the sentiment of climate despair that so many people feel, it's too easy then for the people who are making the problem worse to do whatever they want if you just give up.
Yeah, and I would add as well that you saw in the freak out about these rail strikes and the possible economic consequences that these rail strikes would have, how much power working people have to change the course of what our government is doing politically. And the idea that, especially when it comes to climate, that the only thing we can do is vote for liberals. So, well, they believe in climate change and the other guys don't, so I'm going to vote for them. And then you kind of just go home at the end of the day. That's still kind of a losing scenario, considering even it's bipartisan across the ideological spectrum that we're kind of doubling down on this kind of extractive capitalism. If we might do making a few little tweaks around the edges with electric vehicles or infrastructure, green infrastructure or whatever. But that's the reality, is that it's not going to be through voting for the right person that's going to, really put a dent in this crisis or really start moving us in the direction that we need to be going. And the way that's going to happen is when working people realize the power that they have collectively to withhold their labor and shut down the entire economy, the entire global economy. This is within our power to do. And ultimately, the people that are kind of pulling the strings in our society, the political elites, business elites, that's the only thing they're ever going to really listen to, is when the line stops going up. When working people organize and strike, they can stop the line from going up. And that's when working people have leverage. So yes, we should be voting for people that support green legislation, but ultimately that's where the real change is going to come from people collectively organizing and realizing the power that we have to control our destiny.
Well, and in fact, I think you made a really good point about, this question of who, if people are trying to figure out who they should be voting for, is look for people who are actually, at least rhetorically on the side of working people. And then ideally find people who are actually fighting for them. And that is one of the kind of, it's not enough, but one of the bright spots in the nation's capital, and I think that there's probably better things happening at the local and state level, is that there are more democratic socialists in Congress than there have ever been, I think, ever. You have Greg Casar, who was elected, and he was a labor organizer in Austin, and he's now a representative of Congress. You have Cori Bush. You have Summer Lee, who was an organizer from the Pittsburgh area. And so it's a small number of people and a small percentage of the Democratic Party in Congress. But one of the great points that was made in that documentary To the End was one of the activists was just saying, like, we're the only ones with ideas. And so that's one of the reasons if we, when we push our ideas and we prove that they're politically winning ideas, then a lot of the establishment will fall in line because they just don't have ideas. Now, I mean, like, there are kind of like ideological and kind of structural reasons why, certain forms of reform are anathema, but like, it's amazing how true that is, that simple fact. And like all the good things that exist within the IRA are entirely because of the push for the Green New Deal. Like, that's the only reason that that there's even anything that's good, basically. I mean, it's something of an exaggeration, but like, it's not that much of an exaggeration.
I think that's a positive note to wrap up on. I mean, those are the people we were celebrating when they won in November, and those are the people we'll keep an eye on when the new Congress is sworn in January. Brad, thank you so much for joining us today. Where can people find Hill Heat and more of your work?
Well, it's Hill Heat is at hillheat.substack.com. I'm Climate Brad on various social media platforms, including Twitter, but also on Mastodon and Facebook. And that's it. And, you can just send me a line, climatebrad@gmail.com if you want to chat. And I hope people subscribe to my newsletter. I hope it's reasonably entertaining and informative, and it's never sponsored by Chevron, which is my big my big professional differentiator.
Swipe at Politico.
Unfortunately, this show
Politico, Axios, Morning Consult,
the Insurgents podcast,
Semaphore.
Yeah. Oh, the Semaphore stuff right away.
The New York Times. The New York Times Aramco spreads have been amazing. It's really just so great to see your like journalists murdering petro dictatorship ads in the New York Times every day.
Well, yeah, like Rob was saying, the Chevron sponsors us, but also the MBS is on our board, so we can't really.
Yeah, our hands are kind of tied on that one. But.
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to.
We can't really touch that one. I'd like to keep my limbs.
Yeah, don't go to any embassies and avoid those. That's where they get you.
Brad, thank you so much for joining us.
It was a pleasure.
Hey everyone, thank you for listening to The Insurgents. If you want to subscribe to the show, you can find us on iTunes or Spotify or at Substack, theinsurgents.substack.com. You'll get the latest episodes delivered straight to your inbox as well as our newsletter. On Twitter, we are at InsurgentsPod. Tweet at us, harass Ken in our replies, and then send us your hate mail to theinsurgentspod@gmail.com. Thank you once again for listening.